Thank you all for coming. I'm Leeya Mehta, and I'm going to hand over to Danny Lawless to give us a little bit of an introduction to Plume 9, which is his editorial baby. Danny, go ahead.
First, thank you all for coming, and I can't believe this is the 9th edition. We're going into our 10th year with Plume, and it began as such a whim. I thought I'd get one issue out and depart and declare victory, but it seems to have gone on and on over these years. So I'm going to read just a few paragraphs or so from the introduction, which seems better than me trying to wing it, about the nature of Plume Poetry 9, which is very different from all of the others. And so I'll say a few words from that. So at first glance, this is what it's going to look like. And in design, I think it looks like the last 3 or 4, and really not terribly different from the first 5 either. But it is quite different, and I'll say these words, so that in this edition, the names of many of the poets will be familiar to you. They're sort of contemporary masters, one might say, if that doesn't embarrass some of you. Old friends, I guess, of at least of Plume, whom you will recognize and sort of get reacquainted with as almost on an annual basis. But now there has been a change. In previous anthology, it has been I, as the editor, who decided in the end which poets to include, which is fine enough. But now it has occurred to me, or some months ago occurred to me, it's time for me to step aside from this sort of gatekeeping role and hand it over really to the poets themselves. And there are many reasons for this, but foremost, I suppose, that the state of poetry has become so large and diverse, so populous, as anyone who reads contemporary poetry online or in print, we're inundated with work in a good way, but it's so large and populous as to surpass any one person alone's ability to in any way reasonably and certainly justly to govern that current state of poetry, however temporary that gatekeeping office might be. So what to do? Well, in effect, the answer was, again, to enlist 45, I think, maybe 49 guest editors, I suppose we could call them, who, as Leeya said, will contribute a poem of their own, but also crucially select another poet and introduce him, her, or them. And then we will publish a poem of that person's. And it's also important to note, and this came up early on in a number of discussions, it's important to note that if the selector poets are probably more well-known than those that they have selected, it's not a hierarchy by any means. Because if you have read the work of the people who are going to read with us tonight, you will quickly understand how uniformly, astonishingly good it is. As most poets know then, celebrity is hard work, and getting to where the selector poets have been and have become is due to that hard work, but also a matter of chance and being in the right place at the right time. Sometimes other factors come into play, but it's my great wish that in this new anthology, you won't think so much of the other 45 or 49 wonderful poets who are missing, but rather focus your attentions on the 45 to 49 poets who may not be as well known to you, but whose acquaintance you will be greatly gifted to make as you read the anthology. I know in the best way, this will be a way to reinvigorate the anthologies, some new blood, new voices, new approaches. And I think that's all to the good. I know personally, as we go into our 10th year at our 9th anthology, I haven't been excited about one of these annual print anthologies as I have probably since the very first one. And I hope that is true for you. So with all that said, and I would say onward, thanking you in advance, Kevin and Christopher, Teri and Saida, and Amma and Leah and Nancy. Paisley, as you might know, is off running a half marathon, as good as a reason as I can imagine for missing a poetry reading. And Leah will read her poem. So thank you for bearing with me for these few moments, and back to you, Leah.
Thank you, Danny.
Sure.
Welcome again, everyone. We are having a series of readings. There's going to be 5 of them. Today is the first, just so you know, so you can come back again, which we would love to see you. The anthology itself will be released in April, so we should be able to get a copy then on our website, Plume Poetry, under anthologies. And without further ado, Kevin Prufer's newest book, How We Loved Them, received the Julie Suk Award and was on the long list for the 2019 Pulitzer Prize. His new book, to be published next year by 4-Way Books, will be called The Art of Fiction, Poems. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, and it's a real pleasure to read this one poem that is in this coming anthology. And I just wanted to say I love this sort of generosity behind this this model of editing and the way it sort of brings new writers into a conversation that could certainly use them. So I'm going to read this poem, and I'm going to introduce Chris Murray. My poem is just called Love Poem, and it takes place at an airport. Remember those? Love Poem. A bank of payphones by the restrooms, obedient and ready to serve. Remember those? I am sometimes one of them, obsolete, recollected fleetingly, your eyes on the glowing screen in your palm. Travelers wheel their endless carry-ons past the food court. There are so many cell phones at airport gates. Look around, count them. 20, 22. But management hasn't torn out all those payphones yet. They are like sad old men who never get to leave the facility, not even for groceries. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this poem to be so self-indulgent. Sunlight glitters on the parked plane's steel torsos. I love you. Could you put me in your pocket as you board your flight? Christopher Brean Murray wrote a little piece about him that I'm going to read. It's very short. But I didn't say in my piece that, that he has an amazing book manuscript, his first, that is just making the rounds now. And whatever press picks that up will be very, very lucky. So I will say that in Christopher Brean Murray's alluring poems, characters set out on strange adventures. They enter museums of impossible objects, and they venture down forest paths to abandoned settlements, or they wander along the industrial outskirts of strangely quiet cities. All at once, the new American painters, all of them, everywhere, seem to act in unison, as if their simultaneous cooperation had some specific and perhaps insidious intent. Or a young man might meditate on the possibilities for a book called A History of Clouds, appearing nearly to write it before our eyes. Although Chris's poems take place in what seemed to be our own familiar world, a world of vans in moonlight, hulking refineries, the silhouettes of silos and barns, everything in them is strangely off-kilter and mysterious, peopled by possibly malevolent characters. And the speakers in Murray's poems move through these landscapes with a mixture of curiosity, odd passivity, ambivalence, and moments of startling insight. Transmigration is the shortest of Christopher Murray's poems I've encountered, a compact and playful meditation on anxiety, wit, and departure. And to me, I think it just sizzles. Christopher. You're muted though.
Christopher, you're muted. You can unmute yourself. Welcome.
Sorry about that. So I wanted to thank Kevin, but also, of course, Danny and Nancy and Leah. And I feel very honored to be in this issue of Plume. I did want to say one thing before reading the poem, which is that it contains a phrase that I read in a poem almost 30 years ago, and a poem written by a friend, and yet this poem was written fairly recently, but that phrase was just bouncing around in my head for decades, and finally found a place where I could sort of pay homage to this poem I loved, and my friend Nadia, who wrote the poem, is here now, so I just wanted to acknowledge her and my debt to her. The poem is called Transmigration. The Slav called, said he wants his lamp back. I thought he said lamp black, so I went looking in last year's basement and in the attic of disproportion. I found leaflets and a summons, someone else's yearbook, and that someone was me. I yearned to be free of the evidence against me. I discontinued a subscription and swept out my storage unit. That's when the clerk accosted me, said I was encumbering his agenda with ignominious swans or lumbering over a swale at dawn. I was doing neither, though I'd proved nothing considering the weather. I told him I'd moved far from the isthmus of torrential delusion and was employed part-time as a smelter. That was semi-true, though fractious and dissolute, yet it corralled my forces for the new upheaval to which he wasn't invited. Delighted, I sported a fedora that the wind tried to steal. It was late. I hurried to catch the tungsten train beyond the driftwood gate at the foot of a dripping glacier. I paid my fare.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Kevin. That was wonderful. I'm going to introduce Teri. Teri Ellen Cross Davis is the author of Haint, winner of the 2017 Oyana Book Award for Poetry, and her new book just came out, A More Perfect Union, winner of the Charles B. Wheeler Poetry Prize. She was awarded the Poetry Society of America's 2020 Robert H. Winter Memorial Award and is the recipient of grants from the Sustainable Arts Foundation. She's a graduate Cave Canem Fellow. Teri.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you, Danny, for this incredible opportunity for this reading today, and just to be in conversation with Saida Agostini, who's just one of the dopest poets that I think out there. So I'll read the poem that is in Plume, and this is called When I Am the Only One in the Room. The southern roots of y'all makes music in my mouth's map. In the north, I cuff the sea hard for couplet then soften it for child and chain. When booking, I drop the G. Depending on the audience, I find it again running. By 10, I knew when to let the W whistle in whom, but darken the room for the D to fall asleep in. I don't know nothing, but the beauty of when a double negative will do. How to make this English buck, then soft shoe when I see you. And to introduce Saida.
That's a beautiful poem.
Oh, thank you. One of my just ace poetic partners in crime. I will read to you what I wrote for Plume. Saida Agostini is a poet of great honesty and talent. Whether lushly describing Guyana or Baltimore or unearthing historical figures like Nellie Jackson, the Black Madam of Natchez, Mississippi, her rich language creates worlds that beckon exploration. I am in awe of how she conveys color, sound, and feeling. Saida and I are both members of the Black Ladies Brunch Collective, and in 2017, our first anthology, Not Without Our Laughter, Poems of Humor, Joy, and Sexuality, was published by Mason Jar Press. While working on the anthology, we were tasked with creating a new poem in response to another member's work. I responded to Saida's poem, Harriet Tubman is a Lesbian, and in doing so, wrote a poem that pushed me to a new place because Saida's fervent and descriptive language demanded that of me. I was emboldened to talk about sexuality and Black women's bodies with a confidence, an air of reclamation. Why couldn't we treat our imagination as the fertile place it is and explore? Saida's work asks those questions of me. As her work reaches a larger audience, I look forward to those questions being asked of more readers. Please welcome the dopest Saida Agostini.
Can you just come around to all my Zoom meetings and introduce me everywhere? I really appreciate it. I just want to start off with just one, thanking Teri for thinking of me. And she's someone I think, like, I don't say this lightly, like I really rejoice in her generosity and how it is she always elevates support for other poets, particularly other Black women. And also I'm so, so grateful to Plume and Danny Lawless just for even thinking of this model and like offering it as a possibility model for just demonstrating the incredible wealth of poetry and poetics in the US. So now I'm gonna read y'all a poem. This is called A Short Sermon on Black Death. My grandfather got up every morning and prayed until he could not. I remember the way he rose from bed with the threads of dawn breaking over lonely Black curls clinging to his bare head, wrinkled knees crooning to wooden planks, how he honored God for every single aching thing. Air, his wife, his own voice, 6 children, the unending journey from Guyana to this still corner attic in Brooklyn. For all this, I'm not saying he was a good man or even a bad one, but there is something exquisite in gratitude, the meticulous accounting of joy. I was with him when he died, 86, cradled in a clean bed, my granny beseeching, Victor, don't leave me. Her Bible between them, wailing daughters garbed in white flocked around like pulsing lilies. It is enough for me that he died in his own bed by no one's hands except the divine. I think of that this morning. All the dangers we must travel, the monsters soothed, just to find sleep and wake without fear, enthralled with the dawning loveliness of my own breath. To rise from bed, fall on my knees before the sun, name each trembling grace like my forefathers, fugitive mercies that teach us how to live even as a great dragon sleeps in our own home, feral and coiled, a scaled, undulating fire. Is this what my grandfather sought to study in those quiet, restless days I laid sheltered in their bed? Between him and my granny, not yet fluent in the awe of our survival, his knees still on the floor, a lament, searching. Thank you.
Saida, thank you. Teri, thank you. I am going to introduce Paisley, who's running the marathon. She is the author of, Paisley Rekdal is the author of 10 books of poetry and nonfiction, most recently Nightingale and Appropriate, a Provocation. She guest edited Best American Poets 2020. Garden of Monsters by Paisley Rekdal. Bomarzo, Italy. I did not visit the monument to grief, its stones carved at the command of a hunchback who returned home from war to find his wife dead, friends slaughtered, and so constructed a garden where one can find a spider carrying upon its back a web of time, giants crushing an elephant, a lion into whose gaping mouth your every whisper becomes a scream. I did not attend the garden of grief and in this way thought to inoculate myself against it. But who is to say that looking meant I would have felt anything? Or that the point of the garden was to pity the maker, to believe that the monster is the self that will not relinquish its suffering. I have constructed such a garden. Here the figure of a lost child, a furious mother, here the womb made out of stone. Come and look, but pity nothing, certainly not the young couple stumbling from their car now with a camera and a sack of cherries, who will walk all day together here for pleasure, laughing among the fragments. Thank you. And now, welcome to Amma. I'm going to read Paisley's introduction to Amma Codjoe. And this is, I quote, I had the pleasure of reading a lot of poems during the year I guest edited Best American Poetry. And time and again, I came across work by a poet whose voice kept calling to me long after I finished reading her poems. That poet's name is Amma Codjoe, and I began to look specifically for her work in journals. Amma's poems are direct, but never simple, beautiful, but never sentimental. Over the past year, she's gaining more recognition for her work, something I'm happy to see and even happier to support. And then I'm going to read your very brief, bio. Amma Codjoe is the author of Blood of the Air, winner of the Drinking Gourd Chapter Poetry Prize, and Bluest Nude, forthcoming from Milkweed Editions in fall 2022. Among other honors, she is the recipient of a 2017 Rona Jaff Writers Award and a 2019 NEA Creative Writing Fellowship. Welcome, Amma.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Danny, Nancy. It's a really beautiful thing to be a poet and to be among other poets and people who want to hear poetry. So thanks for building the space together today. And definitely thanking Paisley for her generosity and camaraderie. We have never met in person, but I just am really grateful for her advocacy for my work. I am going to read the poem that's in the anthology. It's called Facing Off. I feel naive when I think of it now, how carelessly I stood before him, like a ballet dancer in a dressing room, right with the backs of other girls. This was before the coldness he nursed and kept warm between his thighs. I waited too long for a thaw, He waited too. Taking him into my mouth, I knew the ache of winter. I heard the silences grow as a field of stones between us. When I look back at my body, young in the bedroom dark, lit by a perpetual city, I am gripping a rock in my right hand, and he is gripping a rock in his right hand. We face each other, muscles poised for sex or war. Who dropped the rock? Who cast it? I'm unsure, even now, who cried mercy first. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, Emma.
thank you, Amma.
So it's always Danny's wish for us to be quick and get through the readings really quickly. And we got through them a little too quickly, I feel like. I feel like another round of everyone.
Does anyone have, Leah, maybe anyone have a question, or we can fill
Yeah,
up?
so why don't we open it up for questions for 10 minutes?
Yeah.
And feel free to just raise your hand maybe, so that we don't speak at the same time. So we'll, just, I guess, raise your hand in the reactions or just come on. I don't have the moderation function, Zach does. But hopefully it will be fine. So go ahead. Oh, I do have the moderation function now. Okay, perfect. So go ahead.
Kevin, I was thinking of, as you read your poem and as I read it too, and I can't recall the poet, I can't believe it. Those early elegy poems, do you remember them?
By whom?
I can't remember. Early elegies, one was in fact about a telephone booth, and another about penmanship. And I'm afraid to go away and look in the magazine online because I'm afraid I won't make my way back. But if you look at the magazine, Early Elegies, and it's by someone we both know well, I'm sure. Yeah. They're really short, beautiful little poems about things that have drifted away from us recently.
I'll check them out. Thanks.
Yeah, you'll know immediately who it is, as will I when I look.
I can ask a question, maybe. I was wondering, in this new year, there seems to still be sort of the tendency towards finding ourselves online because we're not really ready yet to meet in person. So I was wondering what forums you guys are coming out and reading in. Maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about them. I could ask Teri, do you want to start and talk a little bit about where you're reading and what you're reading?
Yeah, I'm reading in a couple different forums, and the Writer Center, being one of them. I'm reading soon there for a book of essays my husband and I collaborated on. We didn't collaborate on a book of essays. We collaborated on one essay in the book of essays called Deep Beauty, which for us was about just kind of the idea of creating a world of upholding the beauty of Black women so that our children could grow up seeing Black people reflected in art in beautiful ways around our house, and just other things too that dealt with like colorism and things like that. But and as a poetry coordinator, to bring my work into it, I find this really fascinating how poetry has just exploded in this virtual kind of world. And it also seems as if it's reaching more people. And I think that too is fascinating in a time in which we've closed ourselves off from meeting new people in this way, but we are meeting new poets, right? And we're reading new words, and it's taking us to deeper places of exploration in the one place that we can explore, and that's who we are and our connections to each other as human beings. We can't see each other in person, but we can explore what still connects us, and it's making us focus on that. So yeah, I'm reading in a lot of places, and I'm seeing and loving how often there are readings online. I missed a reading today, now that I think about it, at 2 p.m. that I wanted to see with Martina Spada and I found Michael Weaver. Just hit me like, oh, that's right. Too busy hanging out with my 10-year-old. But so but yeah, there's lots of different places, online workshops, all of this. I just find fascinating. The sociologist in me is just really intrigued at these ways in which we are connecting now.
Teri, do you think this will continue when we're able to meet in person again in any number of months?
I think so. I know, at least for me, and you know, for the series that I run at the Folger, I'm really keen on keeping our online presence as well as having in-person readings. Yeah. But I love the fact that I ran a workshop last fall with a good friend of mine, Kim Roberts, called Shakespeare's Sisters Say Her Name. It was 8 weeks of learning about Black women poets, from Phyllis Wheatley to Tracy K. Smith. And we had people participate in that workshop in Connecticut, in New Hampshire, yes, in California, in Missouri, and many of them were new to the Folger, but had an interest and an appetite to learn about Black women poets. And they found this workshop. So I love that aspect. You know, I have a reading on Monday with a poet friend of mine in Ireland, and she's joining from Ireland. And it's like, all of a sudden the world is opened up, and there's so many poets out there that we can get to. And
it makes one wonder why this didn't happen before.
Yes. And then just not even talking about accessibility.
Yeah, I mean, it seems so, yeah. It seems so obvious in hindsight, doesn't it?
It does, it does. Yeah.
We have people in the audience from all over the world, I think, today. I can see a friend of mine from India as well. And it's really, it does feel amazing to see that everyone here is from everywhere. I mean, we're not in the same place. I'm in Delaware right now. Where are you, Chris?
I'm in Houston, and I'm looking at my friends Earl and Susan, who are in Montana, and Kevin's also in Houston, but court day, I think, is in maybe Pennsylvania, and Jeffrey Nutter, who I think is still here, is in New York City. And I guess I was just going to continue the thought a little bit by saying, this is the first reading I've given during the COVID pandemic, but I've attended other people's online readings. And then one of those people I see whose reading I attended a little while back, I saw here tonight. And then I've been part of Jeffrey Nutter's Waltz and Glass writing sessions, and several of the people, which one of them went on today right before this reading, and I see that several people from this session are here in the reading. So it's just a really good example of the very phenomenon you're talking about.
Where are you? Where's everyone else? Saida, where are you?
Oh, I'm based in Baltimore.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that feels exciting about this format is, you know, trying out things that maybe I don't know if I would necessarily have felt the courage fully to do. You know, when we're in a non-pandemic world, fingers crossed that is a reality. So I actually came out with a chapbook last year, looking at the life of Nellie Jackson. It was like, oh, I love that you have it. It's called Stunt, but it's exploring the life of Nellie Jackson, who was a Black woman who was a madam in Natchez for 60 years with the full cooperation of like the sheriff, like the politicians, everyone. I mean, she even had a gift shop, like a literal gift shop where you could go and buy things. And I'm actually starting to change it into a choreo poem. And I got funding to do it, and it'll all be online. And I think because like there wasn't this further step of having to like identify a space and think about all these other things, it just felt really exciting to do and just test it out. And I think that's one of the benefits, I think, of doing things via the internet, is that you can explore and maybe push yourself in ways that you wouldn't have necessarily thought about before.
Emma, Kevin, would you like to?
I can say that one of the things I like about, I'm doing a lot of poetry readings because my new book just came out, which means I've just sort of got set up with the whole, probably too many. I'm afraid that there'll be fewer and fewer people at them because of the way that Zoom poetry readings are so easily accessible, but we'll see. But I'll tell you about one thing that I love this publishing model, and it's something I've been doing with my friend Wayne, something like that's the cousin of this, which is we run a series called the Unsung Master Series, where we publish a book every year about and by an author nobody's ever heard of. That's our rule. Mm. Or at least if you get 20 poetry fanatics at a table, maybe one might have heard of her. And then we reprint a lot of her work alongside essays by various people about why you should be paying attention to her. I got one here, see, there's one. We're doing something kind of, this is on the poet and disability rights activist, Laura Hershey. But we're doing this thing that's so similar where we invite, we're starting this every couple of months. We're inviting 6 or 7 poets whose work we really admire. Last time it was Paisley Rekdal was among them. We asked them each to bring the work of a poet they don't think anybody in the room will ever know about. And it can be from any time. It can be a poet who's been dead for 800 years or a poet who's just beginning, and to do a reading of their work. And it's the kind of thing that would have been absolutely like prohibitively expensive before the pandemic. I mean, how do you bring that many people into a room all over the world? But anyway, I'm just cheering on this model, I guess, that Danny's doing here with Plume. So.
I think that this is going to be the way of Plume anthologies in the future. Yeah, I'm really, as I say, really excited about this, and I should have thought of it before, but I didn't.
I do want to make a note too. Another benefit of these online readings is, as like, normally I have so much of my budget that I spend toward lodging and travel, and now I get to kind of double down on honorariums, which makes me feel like, yes, this is, I'd rather pay the poets and have that moment. So I think that there again are just silver linings. And again, I can't stress the accessibility enough, and like having readings with closed captioning, and for those who are not physically able to leave the house or get out to larger places that may not have wheelchair ramps or things like this, then we have this opportunity to share work. And I think it's so important that poetry reach as many people as it can, and those who need it the most.
And I'm currently in Tennessee. And what to say, I don't have much to add to the topic of conversation, but I am glad for the ways that we can feel connected, particularly through poetry. Yeah, I mean, I think my temperament is not like, I don't love to be on a computer all the time, although that is like my life. And I'm grateful for the fact that I can work remotely, but I often want to just let my computer be out in the rain, being weathered by like snow and rain and wind. But I'm grateful when it comes to these moments that we get to connect and share and listen and kind of behold, actually, like in a way that I think is different in a room full of people, just kind of gazing at each other and listening. So I'm grateful for that.
Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to have our next session on March 13th and the following one on April 10th, and then it goes on. So we would love to have you back. Nancy Mitchell is going to be our moderator the next 2 sessions, and we're very excited about this model. So we're looking forward to seeing everyone soon, and really appreciate everyone coming.